economy had the fastest growth since World War II, growing a whopping 7.5%. That sounds brilliant. Less so, though, when you compare it to the fact that the economy crashed more than that in 2020. What do you reckon then? Should that growth be celebrated or taken with a pinch of salt? And what is the state of the UK economy? And the Labour Party's biggest union donor, Unite, says it's reviewing its funding of the party because they say it's not being the party for workers. Are they right? Has the Labour Party lost its way? And a human rights watchdog was come under fire today by Stonewall and 19 other LGBTQ plus WX, well, I don't know, but you get my gist. Lots of the organisations have come together and criticised the fact that they've been asking Scotland to pause its plans to make it easier for people to change their sex on their birth certificate. Is that transphobic? Are you keeping up? Or are you lost with this whole topic? We'll have all that to come and more, but first, the latest news headlines.
I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. It's 6:01. The Defence Secretary says Russia could invade Ukraine at any time. But speaking in Moscow earlier, Ben Wallace says the Russian government assured him they have no intention of invading their neighbour. Mr Wallace also said there are no plans for the UK to send 600 special forces to Ukraine, adding he hopes there's a way forward after today's talks.
I was clear about the tragic consequences that any invasion of Ukraine could have for all people, both Ukrainian, Russia and the security of Europe. We listened to the assurances given by Minister Shoigu and indeed General Gerasimov that they would not invade Ukraine, and we urged dialogue as a way through to address any concerns that the Russian government may have.
The Home Secretary says the next Metropolitan Police Commissioner faces stark challenges as she looks to find a replacement for Dame Cressida Dick. Priti Patel says the culture at the force and the behaviour of its officers needs an overhaul by a new leader. Dame Cressida Dick announced her departure yesterday, and GB News Home and Security editor Mark White has an update.
Here at the Home Office, Priti Patel has confirmed that she has now begun the process to find a new Metropolitan Police Commissioner. Any replacement for Cressida Dick, she says, would have to show strong and decisive leadership to deal with the institutional issues that have plagued the Metropolitan Police in recent years. It is also the most political of policing roles, having to straddle the competing demands of a Labour London Mayor and a Conservative Home Secretary. And like every police commissioner before them, the new head of Scotland Yard is unlikely to be in the post long before they face their own fresh controversies.
UK health officials say a patient has died with a confirmed case of Lassa fever. The UK Health Security Agency says the person died in Bedfordshire following the discovery of 2 cases of the Ebola-like virus in England earlier this week. They say risk to the general public remains low. In other news, Canadian State has declared emergency in response to protests against COVID restrictions. Ontario's Premier Doug Ford says he'll urgently enact laws to crack down on those who interfere with the free flow of goods and people. Since Monday, lorry drivers have been blocking roads in the capital, Ottawa. Mr Ford has called for an end to the demonstrations.
We're now 2 weeks into the siege of the city of Ottawa. I call it a siege because that's what it is. It's an illegal occupation. This is no longer a protest.
The UK economy grew by a record 7.5% in 2021, following a large fall the year before due to the pandemic. Official figures show GDP grew by 1% in the final quarter last year, despite the impact of the Omicron variant in December. But economists are warning inflation and tax rises could dampen confidence in the coming months. And the cost of diesel has spiked, leading to fears that businesses will further increase prices for customers. The AA says the average price of a litre of fuel hit 151.21 pence, and that this latest jump increases pressure on inflation. All COVID restrictions in Wales could be lifted by the end of March. That's according to the Welsh Economy Minister. Vaughan Gething has been given a briefing on the changes in place of First Minister Mark Drakeford, who's currently self-isolating after he tested positive for COVID. COVID passports will end next week and face masks will no longer be required in museums or cinemas from the end of the month. And Spain has dropped its entry requirement for British children over the age of 12 to be vaccinated. They'll now only have to show proof of a recent negative COVID test. Meanwhile, fully vaccinated passengers will no longer need to take a test when arriving back in the UK. And exports of Scotch whisky rose by almost a fifth last year to more than £4.5 billion. They were helped by the end of US state tariffs, which were imposed by former President Donald Trump. The Scotch Whisky Association says the main driver was a 71% increase in demand from Latin America, but exports are still 8% down on pre-pandemic levels. And koalas have officially been listed as endangered along much of Australia's east coast. Their population has fallen around 30% compared with 3 years ago due to droughts, bushfires and land clearing. The Australian Koala Foundation estimates there are fewer than 58,000 koalas left in the country. TV, online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Dewbs & Co.
Thanks for that, Bethany. Well, keeping me company until 7 o'clock tonight. My panel, we've got Daniel Moylan, who's the Conservative member of the House of Lords, Frank Furedi, who's an author and academic, and journalist and broadcaster Nabila Ramdani. And you know the drill on Dewbs & Co. It's not just about us and our thoughts, it's about you at home and yours. I want you to get in touch with me tonight and let me know what is on your mind. What are you thinking about? What are you talking about? Is there anything you're ranting about today? You can get in touch with me on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at GB News. Now, I was about to launch straight into the Cressida Dick story, but you will have just heard in the headlines there reference to the Canadian truckers, everything that's going on in Ottawa. And I didn't realise, but one of my panellists, Frank Furedi, you just described yourself as Canadian, and you had a strong response to that headline story. I'm intrigued as to your thoughts about what is going on over in Canada.
Well, to me, it's very much like the Brexit moment has arrived in Canada. And what you have is a lot of people making a decision to take matters into their own hands, people who've been ignored. It all began as a reaction against an attempt to force people, only those drivers who had vaccinations could cross the border from America to Canada and vice versa. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people have begun protesting against using mandates, vaccination mandates, but it's now spread out. And a lot of important other issues have been raised. And if you talk to the people that are on the demonstration, they're just ordinary folk who are just fed up with being ignored and marginalized. And basically, a lot of Canadians want to have a voice. And I think what's interesting is that the Prime Minister Trudeau, the Liberal Prime Minister Trudeau, treats these protesters as if they're somehow right-wing fascists, just for the very simple reason that they want a bit of freedom from themselves. And it's now turning into a literal political revolt, which I find, sort of quite inspiring, that ordinary people have got this incredible creativity to essentially paralyze the capital city, but also it's spreading out all over Canada now. It's going to French Canada, Quebec City, Manitoba, Alberta. They're all having their own freedom convoys. So it's a very exciting moment. Yeah,
and by the way, it's not just over there. It's happening in Europe. There's been talk of it happening in the UK. It's really captured the mindsets, the momentum of people. I think, Frank, the way that Trudeau has responded to this has been appalling. Yeah. He calls these people a fringe minority, often dismisses them as racist, misogynist, extreme individuals. And I think you're quite right, to draw the parallels with the whole Brexit scenario. And also I would draw the parallels as well. Remember with the yellow vests, the Gilets jaunes, all those protests that were going on. And I find it such a fascinating kind of scenario where you've got the ordinary people saying, no, we don't want our lives impacted you by this. And the response of the establishments is to dismiss them, smear them, rubbish them. You've had a state of emergency, of course, declared, haven't you, in Ottawa? And I also found it fascinating. I don't know if you saw what happened with the fundraising. Did you see the fundraising was frozen?
That's right. And not only that, but if you, as an ordinary citizen, give some food to the truck drivers, you could be arrested for that. If you give them some money, you can be arrested for that.
Whereas, I think, if I could say, if these were Extinction Rebellion protesters sticking themselves to the streets and parking their vehicles to block everybody up, the establishment in Canada wouldn't dream of even touching them. They'd be out there cheering them on.
Yes.
Going out, feeding them and all the rest of it, I
Probably.
suspect. I've taken us off topic there. Nabila, did you want to come in at all? You don't have to, by the way, because this is not what I was supposed to be talking about, but I couldn't resist when I found out that Frank was Canadian.
There are going to be truckers' demonstrations in Paris or indeed across France at the weekend, and there could be a possibility that it might turn violent, in fact. I mean, of course, France has seen violent protesters in the likes of the Gilets jaunes that you mentioned. And I think the truckers' protests will extend beyond Trudeau's views on, what they're effectively protesting against. But I think in France it will extend to protests against what the Macron administration stands for as well, beyond what the truckers' initial grievances are.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking as well, by the way, some of the threats to these people. The Ontario Premier, Doug Ford, he's declared a 42-hour state of emergency, threatened vehicle seizures, fines of about $80,000, jail time of up to a year, suspension of commercial licences to punish these protesters. And I can't help but wonder how long this will rumble on for, because, Frank, these truckers, they're very passionate in what they're doing. They have a lot of momentum and support, and I don't see this ending anytime soon, do you?
I don't, and especially because the Canadian political establishment copied Hillary Clinton, who called people like the truckers deplorables. They really angered people, I mean, all across, from all kind of backgrounds. And what's interesting is that even in small towns in the other part of Canada, in the eastern seaboard, you're getting a lot of people rising up and saying, we want a voice, we want to be part of the conversation, we don't want to be ignored, and that's not going to go away anytime soon.
Yeah, Mark has emailed in already and said, when it comes to the Canadian truckers, he says it's a war against the working class by the elites. Interesting. I do like a little bit of spontaneous discussion. That wasn't on my agenda, but so what? If you can't go off piste on your own show, what can you do? Let's talk, shall we then, about Cressida Dick. The Home Secretary Priti Patel and London Mayor Sadiq Khan have clashed over the sudden departure of Cressida Dick last night. Apparently, Khan put the Met Police Commissioner on notice last week, and the Home Secretary had been braced for the London Mayor to withdraw support in the next 3 to 4 weeks, but when the police chief was called to a meeting with the mayor over her plans to reform, she declined and offered her resignation instead. Apparently, Sadiq Khan didn't inform the Home Secretary of his intention to request this meeting with Cressida Dick, which has caused an increase in tensions between the pair. Now, what do you think to this? Was Cressida Dick right to go? Or should she have stayed and tried to see through the reform that she believed that she could achieve? Daniel?
Well, in the short form is, this is Sadiq Khan's mess, and Priti Patel has now got to clear it up. To be perfectly frank, she wouldn't have been my choice for the commissioner in the first place. Sadiq Khan wanted her, that's fine. He should back her. He should have backed her. But of course he ran away, not because of the knife crime that we're all seeing on the streets, not because of the other problems that she's presided over. He ran away because he wanted to be out there doing photos that made him look good. And in the end, I think it was just too much for her. And she said, I'm going to go. You carry on. I don't even think he really expected this. I think he was taken aback, actually.
Well, yeah, because a few hours earlier, she was obviously on the airwaves.
She was going to stay, and I think she looked at it and she said, you know, why should I? He's just milking this for political purposes. Why should I stay around and put up with that? And I can understand that. Whether she should have gone, whether she was the right person in the first place, I think, is a question we could explore. I never really thought she was a leader. There's a another thing about whether the Metropolitan Police is capable of being reformed, which we might come back to.
I think there's a danger that we have Americanized policing in London, that you have an incredible degree of political interference in how policing is conducted. The police are told that you have to follow this agenda, that political agenda, you have to care about diversity, inclusion. They're continually under a microscope. And it's not about whether they're solving crimes or not. It's really about as to whether or not they're speaking to the right kind of script. And what I'm really worried about is you now have a situation where the police, instead of doing their job, are so distracted by political pressure that the problem is not going to get sorted for a long time to come. And what worries me is that Khan has decided, the mayor has decided, that he wants to be more or less in control as to who gets appointed. And I'm absolutely certain that the next person that gets appointed is likely to be far worse than Cressida Dick, because there's a lot of talk about some politically correct commissioners getting the job in order to fit in with Khan's plans for London.
Yeah, Nabila?
Well, I think the most remarkable thing about this story really is that how long Cressida Dick held on for as long as she did, frankly. There have been reports, of course, of her imminent resignation or indeed sacking for years, and many politicians were coming and going during that time. And it's interesting that she's finally gone, that we have two pretty ineffective politicians who are massively involved in running the Met, and I don't think any of them comes out with great credibility, frankly. Both Priti Patel and indeed Sadiq Khan are very much tuned into their media image and how they come across with the larger public. And I think this kind of populism is not ideal when you have such a serious matter at hand, which is to do with London policing. Of course, there have been accusations of a toxic work culture and a string of accusations of scandals that require wise heads, frankly. And I don't think that anybody of great credibility has been able to get hold and indeed sort out those problems. And this, what seems to be going on as a quabble between Sadiq Khan and Priti Patel, now she's calling him rude and professional, I think this isn't what policing should be, or high-level policing should be about at all. I don't think it's just Cressida Dick who needs replacing, frankly. I have been very unimpressed with Priti Patel, who I think is pretty ineffectual. And I think it's rather farcical that now Sadiq Khan and Priti Patel are meant to be working closely together to seek a replacement when their own performances clearly haven't been very impressive.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned about Priti Patel. I've got to say, a sentiment that's coming through quite loud and clear, for example, on the email here, is that it's Sadiq Khan. He's the one that should go. Your thoughts on that, Daniel? I mean, you used to be a former advisor to Boris Johnson when he was the mayor. What do you think about Sadiq Khan, the job that he's doing?
Well, just say one thing, Nabila. I mean, the police minister who works for Priti Patel, who's actually responsible for the police practically day to day in the government, Kit Malthouse, used to be running the Metropolitan Police on behalf of Boris Johnson a few years. He's very sensible, steady, and understands the whole business. And it is the Home Office who will be appointing the new person.
And it is effectively Priti Patel. She's the Home Office.
Yeah, but it'll be the Home Office, and I think it will not just be Priti Patel, I think, doing this. But it isn't really Khan's appointment. That's what I mean about saying that it's Khan's mess, and Priti Patel, the government, has to clean it up now and find somebody who is willing to do this job, who can be appointed. Should Khan go? No. I mean, Khan's been elected as mayor. He is the elected person. The voters chose him. I'd love him to go, but the reality is he should stay until the end of his term, and then he should be defeated at the polls, because that's the right way of getting rid of political leaders. I'd be delighted if he went tomorrow. But it's just one more mess after another. It's this constant thing with Khan. He's not really interested in the way in which the bodies that work for him work, the Met Police, Transport for London. He's not interested in the detail. He's interested in the photo ops and the political statements. This thing that happened in Lambeth, wasn't it, was absolutely dreadful. I mean, the behaviour is completely unacceptable. It was uncovered by this inquiry. Absolutely understand that. But instead of getting together with the Commissioner and really trying to sort it out, he's out there presenting himself, doing the photo ops, and she just gives up. And I don't blame her.
Well, I think the best thing would be if policing in London would be separated from the mayor altogether, so that you minimize political interference. And
well, I'm not sure I agree with that. And I'll tell you why, because we have too many things in this country, Frank, that have no political accountability. And I think it is better that state organizations do have some direct political accountability. The mayor was elected with the job of doing that. He's doing it badly, but that's for the voters to decide. So I can't go along with you on that. I actually prefer the democratic input on this.
I think the democratic input comes in terms of who appoints the commissioner, and I think that should be done by politically elected individuals. But what really worries me, and this is what's been happening in the United States, is that increasingly the mayors, more or less assume the role of moral authorities, who've got somehow the role of directing the way that policing should proceed. And it seems to me either we have a professional police officer in charge of the police, and they're entirely responsible for that, or alternatively you have people sort of second-guessing them, criticizing them, and imposing their agenda on the police, and that's what worries me.
We've always had this distinction, which we should try and preserve, between the operational decisions that the police make, which are very much not for politicians, and the policy directions they follow. One of the problems you've had with Khan setting the policy directions is he's flip-flopped quite a lot. Now he's in favor of stop and search, then he's against stop and search. But I do still think that those policy decisions, it's better that they be politically accountable in a free democratic country than that they all be wrapped up in the hands of expert policemen. It is better that there is a mayor. It's better now than it was before.
Nabila, let me ask you very briefly. Lots of the things there's about 34,000+ police officers that Cressida Dick is responsible for. Lots of the criticism that I've read today, I mean, really, there's been some quite vile commentary today, I would say, about Cressida Dick, about her as an individual, about the kind of way she's conducted herself within this job. And I found it actually quite uncomfortable to read. But that aside, I found this whole notion that the book should stop with her for pretty much everything because she's at the top of the tree, down to the level of, look at these WhatsApps messages that these individual police officers have been sending to themselves. And I kind of think, really, is that realistic to expect that the chief commissioner is accountable, the book stops with them, for messages that individual officers are sending to each other, really?
Well, I agree. Unfortunately, she is the figurehead of an institution in that her job description is she's the commissioner. So she rightly takes the blame, and she also took the responsibility to step down. Clearly, she wasn't unhappy with how things unfolded and how investigations were carried out, very legitimate ones, by the way. But there is also clear miscommunication between Sadiq Khan, who has very legitimate interest in how London Police is being run and how effective it is, and indeed the Home Office. The very fact that Sadiq Khan didn't think it was a piece of information worth sharing with the Home Office, that he requested a meeting with Cressida Dick, shows how little he thinks of Priti Patel. And vice versa, she's been left clueless about what was going on. So I think it's wider than, Cressida Dick. She doesn't sum up the problems, and I think it takes a wider revamping of how the whole institution of the police is being run, frankly.
But do we actually blame the police entirely for what's happening? Because what's happened is that because of these tragic mistakes that have occurred, the entire police is in a sense defined by it. And I think that is very dangerous because, it seems to me that we're talking about tens of thousands of police officers. They're being sort of treated as if they're part and parcel of this canteen culture, as they call it, which I think is potentially quite damaging.
Well, I've heard some awful responses to this story. I've had lots of conversations about have we all lost trust in the police and all the rest of it. I've got to say, I don't know if I'm on my own here, but I haven't lost trust in the police at all. I think it's very easy for journalists to criticise the police and say that they've lost all this trust and, undermine them and smear them in lots of ways. But actually, these are the guys that will go running towards danger, often unknown danger. The amount of stuff that these police officers have to put up with, I commend them. I certainly wouldn't do that job. Would you? So would you be a police officer? And do you still trust the police? I'd be interested in your views there. Kevin has been on the email saying, well, Michelle, it seems the Met Chief has to fall on her sword and take responsibility for everything that happened under her watch. Boris Johnson has to take responsibility for everything that happens in Number 10. What about Keir Starmer? How come he has to bear no responsibility for what happened when he was the head of the CPS? Kevin there responding to, or referencing, should I say, the comments from Boris Johnson that stirred up a bit of controversy after Keir Starmer was surrounded the other day by those protesters. Anyway, going to take a quick break. Let me know your thoughts on some of those topics. And when we come back, I want to talk to you about the UK economy. There's been reports today that it's had its fastest growth since World War II. Woohoo! Sounds good, right? Yeah, until you then compare it to how much it dropped during the pandemic. So we'll be looking at what is the situation. Should we be celebrating today or should we have cause for concern?
We've got a big Saturday for you on GB News. From 6 a.m, it's breakfast with Stephen and Anne. At 10, join Esther and Philip for the Saturday selection. Alistair, Darren and Nana take you through the day. And don't miss Neil Oliver Live at 7 p.m. At 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight, followed by Headliners. That's Saturday on GB News.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. Just a reminder for those of you listening, not watching, as to who it is that's keeping me company tonight. The voices that you can hear, we've got Daniel Moylan, who is a Conservative member of the House of Lords. We've got Frank Furedi, the author and academic, and the journalist and broadcaster, Nabila Ramdani. Now, lots of you guys have been getting in touch throughout the break. I have to say, just touching on that first topic that we covered, which was the Canadian truckers, lots of support for those truckers. Pretty much everyone, I've got to say, is getting in touch and saying good on them, basically. They are the voice of reason in an unreasonable world. Now, I would ask those people that are getting in touch, because I'm on your camp, by the way, but Daniel raised a good point before we went on to our last topic, and he was asking, well, hang on a second, basically, he's comparing them to insulate Britain. It made me think, everyone that's in support of the truckers, me included, by the way, how would you feel if they decamped on your home city, your hometown, and they were impacting your daily life? Would you still support them? Or would you be having second thoughts? Let me know your thoughts on that one. Anyway, should we talk about the economy? Why not? Friday afternoon, and what better thing to talk about than the economy? Ease you into the weekend gently. I bring it up because our economy rebounded last year with growth of 7.5%. It was the fastest pace of growth since 1941. However, and there's a but, it came after a massive 9.4% collapse in 2020 as the pandemic forced parts of the economy to shut. Chancellor Rishi Sunak said the economy had been, I quote, remarkably resilient. And the UK is now confirmed as the fastest growing economy of the G7. Got to be said though, other countries didn't suffer the same sharp decline that we did. So it just kind of made me think, what is going on with the economy? Because I've just mentioned there, good growth, but offset, of course, by the fact that we've had steep declines. There's lots of talk about the whole Brexit situation and what that's doing, what the future should look like for the UK economy as we've now left the European Union. Nabila, your thoughts on all of this?
Well, clearly, as you said, I mean, the GDP has enjoyed a huge bounce, mainly thanks to the terrible figures of in 2020 because of repeated lockdowns and the like. But I think this story is very much about global Britain, as it were, and what it's all about now. It's very much linked to GDP, but also trade, and there are lots of stories linked about UK's trade with what we'd call distant partners that are highlighted in the media more and more. But I think they give the wrong impression, however, because Britain has been trading with distant partners, and especially countries like China, long before Brexit, and for the simple reason that China is, of course, an industrial powerhouse. But I think that pretending that Brexit has somewhat speeded up Britain's reliance on distant partners is wide off the mark. I mean, these are just global trends that have been happening for years. And I think we should also be careful about what we might call the coronavirus economy, which is hugely significant to, yes, the Chinese economy provided millions of masks and other protective equipment. And with luck, I mean, this kind of business won't go on forever. But we should bear in mind that the EU remains the main trading bloc and is a massive trading bloc as regards Britain, and this won't change either.
Well, I'm glad that things are on the up, and obviously it's a bit deceptive given the problems of the economy in recent years and the collapse of the economy last year. But my main concern really is that we're not, in a sense, using the potential of Brexit to its maximum effect. And it seems to me that the problem with Britain is that the investments in infrastructure and in technology are very, very limited. We need to raise productivity in the economy in order to be a competitive player on the global market. We now have the political wherewithal to do that because things are under our control.
But what would you like to see more of then?
I'd like to see the government not just talk about leveling up in the way that it does, but actually saying, you know, these are the sectors of the economy that we want to bank on. We want to really build a first-class infrastructure. They're talking about a net zero economy, and in order to have a net zero economy, they're importing all the technology for that from Scandinavia and other parts of the world. Why don't we make it ourselves? I mean, the Northeast would be a wonderful place to begin to sort of create these new technologies that we need for the future. And it seems to me that the real problem is that the way we're moving at the moment is that we're relying on other countries for the technology. And we're kind of going back to the bad old ways of relying upon things like consumer growth, we're relying on things like finance and the service sector of the economy, and that cannot keep going forever. And that seems to me the real problem, that we're somehow ignoring industry, which is quite foundational for a thriving, flourishing economy.
Yeah, I've got to say as well, when you talk about industry and investment, etc., it makes me wonder and question, do we even have a robust, clear industrial strategy?
That's right.
Because that would be my first point. When we talk about, let's invest more here, there and everywhere, what are the industries that we want the UK to be pioneering? Do you think we've got an answer to that question, Daniel?
Well,
do we have a strong industrial strategy?
I get very worried when I hear people talking about an industrial strategy set by the government, because it usually leads to governments picking winners who turn out to be duds. And we have a long history of doing that. But it's clear the sectors of the economy in which Britain has a lead, but maybe there should be others, but it's clear that we are absolutely a world beater in pharmaceutical, medical services, medical technology. We have the most tech startups in the world and outside California, and attract the biggest investment in Europe into those areas and things of that sort. So we know where we're leaders. Frank, understandably, seems to want us to be leaders in other areas as well, and perhaps that's right that we should. But the question then is the way to make us leaders in other areas for the government to pick them and then invest in them? Or is the way to remove the regulations that hold people back, make investment easier, and allow firms to earn a proper return so that investment actually becomes attractive? And I think that's the balance I'd go for. Just on the growth figures, what the growth figures show is actually not very exciting. Basically, all of the G7 countries are getting more or less back to the level of economic activity they had before the pandemic. They're all doing it at roughly the same rate. We happen to be a bit faster at the moment, partly because we were a bit faster on the way down. We're doing it a bit faster, but roughly that's where everybody is. And we're more or less getting back to where we were before. So I don't go in for a lot of this, Britain is faster than the others. We're all roughly the same.
OK, let's move on, shall we, and talk about the Labour Party. Why? Well, I want to talk specifically about the funding, because Sir Keir Starmer has said that his party won't be influenced by threats. Basically, this is all off the back of one of their core funders, donors, whatever you want to call it, Unite, the union, has threatened to withdraw support by cutting some of their funding. This is, of course, I think it is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, single donor to the party. They gave them $3 million in the run-up to the 2019 election. And now this is all, I'll tell you where it's all stemmed from. It's all stemmed from, if you've been following this story, it's a dispute over bin workers in Coventry. Long story short, the union is basically saying that the Labour Party is not acting on the side of the working people. Keir Starmer, as I said, he's saying he's not going to bow down to threats of, Unite removing funding from them on this basis. What do you think to this, Frank? To me, it opens up. I've used that as almost the hook, that kind of Unite thing. But to me, this opens a much broader conversation about, firstly and foremost, whether or not the Labour Party is doing what it was originally supposed to do, which is all about being for the workers. And then secondly, how much influence should a donor have? How much should they be able to dictate what the party do and don't do in return for their funding?
I think there are two separate issues. I think you're right to suggest that the name Labour is a misnomer and that the Labour Party has become very estranged from its traditional working class base. And it's very clear that when you meet Labour politicians, they lack the empathy to understand what it is like to grow up in a working class community. They feel, in a sense, quite paternalistic towards working class people. They look down upon them. Very often they think that working class people are prejudiced. They don't have the kind of sensitive values that they have.
Well, they often think they're a bit thick, don't they? Let's be honest.
Exactly. And I think when you have that kind of orientation, that kind of outlook, it's not surprising that a lot of trade unionists feel, well, why should we pay our dues over to the Labour Party? And what's the point of supporting a party that only has contempt for us? And I think that that's something that's very important. Of course, there's a problem here, which is that for decades and decades and decades, the unions have been the paymasters of the Labour Party. They've dictated policy. They indicated what they wanted and didn't want. Very often they chose MPs and they chose different political leaders. And that's not healthy for democracy when the donors to the party have such a disproportionate influence upon them. But having said that, I completely empathize with the trade union for saying, well, the days when we automatically give over our money to a party that is, in a sense, not interested in us is gone.
Daniel?
Well, the Labour Party was set up as the political arm of the trade union movement 120, 130 years ago, and it raises the question, really, what is the modern Labour Party for? Because if it's now severed from if it's becoming severed from the trades unions who set it up, they're not the party of organised labour. They're not the party of socialism. Corbyn tried that, and he failed with the voters, but he also failed with his own MPs to persuade them that socialism was a good idea. So it's not the party of socialism. They seem to have rejected Blairism, whatever Blairism actually stood for. So what are they there for, apart from just shouting at the Prime Minister? And if they're going to go bankrupt because of this, I mean, maybe everything has its natural time. Maybe it is time for the Labour Party just to wind up and go into administration.
Really? And,
yeah.
And your key opposition would be who? Which party?
Well, Sir Ed Davey, of course, leads a very fine opposition party. But the fact is, an opposition party would come up that might well represent the voices that Labour was meant to be representing a great deal more effectively. Something would come up in the void to fill the vacancy. You wouldn't have one-party state in this country. So there'd be a competition out there for who would be representing those voices. And for a time, at least, it might be a more effective and authentic representative of those voices.
Yeah, just before I bring you in, Nabila, I'll ask you at home, are you working class? Do you think the Labour Party represents you? Did they used to, and now you've kind of gone separate ways? Or did they used to, and they still do? I'd like your views, views at gbnews.uk. But Nabila, your thoughts?
But I think you're right to widen the discussion about whether or not the Labour Party, as it stands, is representative of the working class and working people in general. And it may be that the unions have a point in the sense that Keir Starmer seems to be going down the Tony Blair route to take out all socialism out of the Labour Party. And a lot of people are actually suggesting that he actually backs most Tory policies, and he certainly isn't providing much opposition to the actual policies of the government. And at the moment, he certainly seems to be more fixated on getting Boris Johnson out through his alleged lockdown offences, rather than opposing his actual policies. I think the second issue here, as you quite rightly highlighted, is the financing. And as far as this is concerned, I'm afraid to say, it's a cliche, but left-wing policies have always been associated with fiscal mismanagement, and there is a long history of the Labour Party getting into serious difficulties with money. And there have been, of course, aberration links to the coronavirus pandemic, but the Conservatives generally base their policies on balancing the books, and what left-wing opponents traditionally do, they are far more focused on social justice and indeed a fair distribution and of wealth. And I think we all know lots of very idealistic left-wingers who don't have much of a clue about how policies are paid for, or indeed how to keep the finances in the black.
Well, Connor's been in touch on the email saying, how can you have a working-class Labour Party, Michelle, run by a Sir who's never suffered in his life? Well, Con, who would you have then running the Labour Party? Who would be your dream leader? Respond to me and let me know that. Also, I had a good comment just come in. I've got to say, lots of you are writing in, so I've just lost it. I can't remember what your name is now, so I apologise for that, but you'll know who you are. You've just written into me and said, Labour Party is not the working class party, it's the working class party. And I think you hit on there. I have to say, I apologise because I've lost your name. So many of you are emailing in and it's pushed down the line. Oh, Mac, there you go, found it, Mac. I think you've hit onto something quite interesting there, haven't you? Do you remember when Keir Starmer was asked about cervix and women? And I think there's a lot of peculiar things going on in the party that does alienate a lot of the working class. But get in touch with me and let me know. You can also tweet me, by the way, at Michelle Dewbs or at GB News. Going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be looking at a human rights watchdog. This is, I've got to say, it's quite a complicated story, is this one, but it boils down to the simple question about how easy should it be to basically self-identify your own gender. So you can ponder on that question whilst I have a break. Let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
That you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. A quick reminder as to who my panel are tonight. We've got Daniel Moylan, who's the Conservative member of the House of Lords, Frank Furedi, who's the author and academic, and journalist and broadcaster Nabila Ramdani. Now, lots of you getting in contact about that last topic there about the Labour Party. Wilma says the Labour Party is now basically Tory. Interesting. Do you share that one? Barry says the real question, Michelle, you should be asking is, do the leaders of Unite truly represent their members? Well, you tell me, Barry, what do you reckon? Do you think that they do? Richard says very simply, you ask, have the Labour Party lost their way? Without doubt, Michelle, yes, they have. Andrew says, I'm working class and I wouldn't dream of voting for Labour again. And I can tell you now, my inbox has lit up. Lots of you guys have an opinion on that one. Let's move on, though, shall we? 20 LGBT organisations, including Stonewall, are seeking to remove the Equality and Human Rights Commission status as an independent body within the United Nations. Scottish ministers want to change the Gender Recognition Act to make it easier for people to self-declare their own gender on their birth certificate, removing the need for medical diagnosis. The EHRC has told them that a more detailed consideration is needed, as they believe the current system struck the right balance between protecting transgender people and women. The LGBT groups, though, have criticised the intervention, claiming that they are influenced by the UK government. Frank Furedi, I mean, where do we even begin with this story? There's so many bits to unpack and unpick to this, isn't there? What's your thoughts on some of it?
Well, the story begins in Scotland, and these 20 LGBT organisations were instrumental in getting the Scottish government to pass this particular law. What's very interesting is that the Scottish government consulted only organisations, only these kinds of organisations, and never took into account the views of those people who were against this particular self-identification. And that to me, it really smacks of a very undemocratic ethos, that only certain people get to decide how transgender people should be treated, whether they can self-identify on their birth certificate or not. Now, what happens afterwards is then the Equality and Human Rights Commission quite rarely raises some issues about this. It says, slow down. These issues have very important implications. let's think about this a little bit more before you pass this law. And then what happens is that these 20 organizations, who in a sense are involved in a power play because they want to be in the position where only they get to decide what the issue is, how that issue is perceived, then threaten to attack the status of the commission by taking it to the United Nations. Now, what's very interesting here is that nobody asked the question, what right does the United Nations have in interfering within the domestic public life of British society? I mean, who made the United Nations into moral gods that they can somehow say that this is an independent organization that is not an independent organization? Because what's interesting is that these 20 LGBT organizations are anything but independent. They have a very clear agenda. They are determined that that agenda is the only one that we can speak to and the only one that can prevail within British society. And anybody who's got the slightest bit of disagreement with that is immediately kind of branded as transphobic.
Yeah, see that label, transphobic and TERF, and there's quite a few of them, you know what I'm talking about. They are thrown around almost as like the ultimate insult. It's almost, if you dare to believe in biological sex actually being a thing, then you are one of these labels, a transphobe, a TERF, or whatever. And this is a topic, a subject that so many people don't even want to get involved in. So what's happened, I think, in my humble opinion, is that because it's become such a prickly subject, people have withdrawn from it, and therefore the goalposts are shifting further and further and further away from what I would call basic common sense and basic biology and science. And people, too many people in my mind, seem comfortable with that. Daniel, your thoughts?
Well, I think the first thing is that this UN Human Rights Commission that they want our lot to be kicked out of consists of a whole load of countries who actually judicially murder homosexuals because it's a crime, and some of them actually hang them. And they want these people to decide that our Human Rights Commission isn't up to their standards. I mean, the whole thing is completely bizarre. The second thing that amuses me is that the famously fox-killing Jolyon Maugham seems to have got tied up in this, arguing on the side of Stonewall. I don't know how he's appeared out of nowhere, but I suppose there was a photo opportunity. I think you're absolutely right, Michelle. I'd go further than you. I don't think that TERF and transphobic are used as insults. If I insult you, we could still make up and be friends later. These terms are used to destroy you, to annihilate you, to remove you from public discourse altogether. If these terms are used against you, it's with the view to silencing you. It's not insulting you at all. And I think that is a very, very dangerous trend.
Censorship of an opposing opinion. Nabila, your thoughts?
Well, I'm a bit like you. I think I find it that a lot of these arguments concerning sex and indeed sexual orientation, they are very difficult topics to take a position on. But I think what this story highlights is it's a very legal one, in my view. I think
Are there difficult topics to have an opinion on? Or is it just people are worried about having a view because they don't want to be attacked? Because to me, I don't think it's very difficult. I think it's quite straightforward. But I think that the confusion and the complexity comes from people are terrified about being criticised or being offensive.
No, I think it goes further than that. I think it's about having an informed view about the experiences of individuals concerned and those who oppose them. And this very often boils down to legal protection and indeed human rights. And that's why this group of LGBT organizations, I mean, they are effectively saying that the Equality and Human Rights Commission stance on a number of LGBT issues seeks to strip trans people of their legal protection, and it poses a grave threat to the ability of trans people to participate in daily life with dignity and indeed respect. And my view is that groups like Stonewall and indeed the Good Law Project clearly work on these kinds of issues all the time, and they are, dare I say, expertly briefed on the law and indeed the experiences of individuals directly involved. And it will be the same for the lawyers and indeed the other experts for the parties they come in conflict with. So I'd rather perhaps leave these discussions to informed people with facts at their disposal rather than reducing it to an angry shouting match.
Why do you say that these organizations have got the moral authority? Because they have the facts. I have the facts, and other people have got the facts. I know, for example, that these issues can be resolved through common sense. And the very idea that we just leave it to them to decide basically means you only hear one side of the argument, and that seems to me to be the problem.
There you go. Issues being solved through common sense. That'd be a novel idea, wouldn't it? That is pretty much all we've got time for. Ray has been in contact saying, great panel discussion without party political sniping. More, please. David says, Labour. The whole concept of working class is no longer relevant, Michelle. Who is working class? Who on earth, he says, wears a cloth cap and has a whippet these days? David, come on, working class is not about caps and dogs, it's an attitude. But it is. You pose an interesting question. What is working class? There you go. That could be your homework. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk with your answers to that. What is working class? Have a good weekend. Thanks to my panel, thanks to you at home. I'll see you on Monday.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGibbon. Dry for much of the time in the southeast during the next 24 hours, but turning wetter and windier elsewhere. However, as that wet and windy weather arrives, it brings with it milder air. Cold air is ahead of these weather fronts as they push into parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland.